Welcome to this story on education innovation. I'd like to introduce you to Alecia Samuels. She will tell the story of the ECI 852 module, and this is just an indication of what she will be talking about.
My name is Alecia Samuels and I work for the Center for Augmentative and Alternative Communication, and we basically have a master's degree in early childhood intervention, and I teach two modules in that program. The first module is a collaborative teaming module where students are put into different teams, and we actually have to teach them collaborative teaming skills within a virtual environment so that they can start implementing that within their own practices as speech therapists, occupational therapists, physios, etc. Because this is the philosophy of how we teach, okay, in terms of how we want intervention to be. So in my class I have approximately 20 students in the first year as well as 20 students in the second year. This master's degree is presented mainly on ClickUp. Students have contact sessions with us, but the way the module is presented is via ClickUp. If you present a module, students think that you as the lecturer is going to provide them with all the information. So to make it a more collaborative online learning environment, I found that I actively need to design my module so that we incorporate more of the social aspects of learning into the module so that students actually feel that they are collaborating with each other. And for me, this is the way you actually build that online collaborative learning community. So it's not just about, for me, posting questions and then getting students to respond. It's actually how do I get students to start interacting with each other so that the content starts making sense to them. And for me, it's also not just about focusing on the content, but how do we start building that social aspects into it. For me, it's like an ecosystem if we're using a biological module where you say that what I do affects everyone else in the classroom. So I want students to learn to know that it's not only them pitching up into an online discussion, it's their knowledge that is required for them to impact on everybody else's knowledge. So it's not just me as a lecturer that is feeding them and they're receiving it. They need to take responsibility for their own learning. First of all, I need to create a teaching presence for them to see that it's not just this person that's out there, but I actually need to show them that I am there with them in the discussion. So I create this in the discussion too. I create a posting where I create this welcoming environment, and I put a message there which tells students what they can expect of me in this discussion as well as what I expect of them, because it's only through them learning that their behavior, their learning impacts on everyone else's learning in the classroom that I can actually get them to participate in these discussions. So it's not just about turning up, it's also about you contributing your knowledge because it's actually expected of you. We can't learn if you don't bring your knowledge to the party as well. So it's important for me to state those things up front for the students in when we start a discussion. So when I do e-facilitation as well, what I try to do is to see that everyone gets a chance to participate, and that some students naturally tend to hang in the background. What I use is I use a system where I write down all the students' names and I put it in a hat, and I use a system of random call outs. So I could choose anyone's name from the hat and say, okay, you will start this discussion question, or I would like you to respond to this person if they made a comment which I thought maybe needed to be replied upon, so that students know that I can call them at any time and the rest of the class is actually waiting for them. Even though we're in an asynchronous environment, they can reply, but people are waiting for them to reply before they can start adding their input. So I found that that works as well. But also, it's not just about the formal discussions for me. It's also about having an informal forum for students to chat as well. And I find that it's important for me to create that informal forum because that social interaction actually impacts on their motivation for participating in an online discussion as well. But it's also an important part of the module that I'm teaching, because I'm teaching about collaboration in early childhood intervention. An important part of that philosophy is that students must know that how they are feeling impacts on their intervention with the child that they are working with the family they are working with. So if they are not right, if their emotions are not right, they're not going to give them the most effective intervention. And from my discussions with students from emails, I found that they've been very stressed about doing a master's degree and having to do their own work as well, because they're all part-time master's students. So what I did was I created a blog tool in ClickUp, and in the blog tool I created a informal chat, and I set the topic, because I found that if I just create the space and said here's a blog tool for you to chat amongst yourselves, they weren't using it. So I actually had to set the topic and say to them, listen, we're going to talk about this. I'd really like your input this week in terms of how you actually handle stress. This is the way I handle it, but maybe you have something to share with the rest of the class that we can all learn from as well. So again, you're creating this learning community, and also a supportive community, so that eventually students also see that it's not just them that are going through the issues, but everyone else as well in the class. Okay. Another thing that I do is to increase the social interaction among students is to create an icebreaker game also in an online discussion. So what I use is I create a crossword, and some of the things students will be able to know, it's about the content of the course. So some of the answers they'll know by going back to the textbook, and other questions to answer in the crossword is where they actually have to interact with other students in the classroom. So I get some personal information from the students, and I put that in the classroom, like what's this one's husband's name, and they actually then have to go and ask those students. So it's a nice way of students getting to know each other as well in a virtual classroom. So for me, that's also a nice way. And then the winner usually sends their answers through to the listserv, and the first one that gets the answer in, I give them a prize when they come to their on-site week again. And students have it's actually built a very nice collaborative environment, because not once has one student sent it in as their own. They've all created within a team. They've decided, okay, let's do this together and see whether we can get it in. And so it's worked very well in that way. And another way that I just check in with students, just for them to know that this virtual environment, you can really build relationships, and just that it's not, distance doesn't mean that we're far apart, we can't interact. So when I'm doing my discussion and I use the Who's Online to see who's online, and if I see a student there and I know students may be struggling, I go in and say, how are you doing, what's happening, and just use that another informal way to know the students that I'm near, that I have that social presence with them as well. And yeah, that for me is important to build that, so that students know that we say a lot to our students, we are here to support you, but they must be able to feel that support. So for me, that's important tool also to use in ClickUp is Who's Online. As a lecturer, I think it's important that I ask students to give feedback as well in terms of how they think I've performed in this discussion, so that I can improve the lecturing the next time around. And so what I ask them to do is, after our online discussions, when I've completed the module with them, I ask them to rate me, because we're always rating them in terms of their quality of their online posting. So now's the opportunity to rate me as well as a lecturer, and then not just to give a rating, but also to say why they're giving that rating, and to make suggestions of what can be improved. And I found that it shows students that you respect their opinions, and I think it's very important for lecturers to do that. And it doesn't have to be a formal tool. You can actually just say, give this discussion a rating and give me qualitative feedback as well. So I found that works very well.
So do you use grading forms for students to evaluate you?
I'm actually not using, but I was actually thinking I need to create a more formal grading tool for this purpose. So it can actually be used for monitoring purposes as well. So I've just been doing it out of my own, creating my own thing in terms of give me a rating from 1 to 5 of how well you think I performed in this discussion, and why. Yeah. For me, the educational benefits of using a more interactive style in the virtual classroom is that in the field of early child intervention, an important philosophy is systems thinking. So for me, this is actually the perfect testing ground for testing out that theory of what I do impacts on everyone else. Okay, so it's not just taking the course, the philosophy of the course that I'm teaching, but also playing it out in actual real relationships with students. So for me, the educational benefit is obvious in that sense, because you're actually living out one of the key principles of the subject being talked about as well. The other added benefit, educational benefit I see, is that as opposed to in a formal discussion where the lecturer is always in control of everything, okay, where she that might create an environment where students might not necessarily be open enough to bring their opinions out. Okay, so for me, creating the informal social environments is where the trust starts to happen, where people start to share personal information, they start to be able to trust each other, and that can have a direct impact then on actual the formal content as well, because when they feel they can trust people in their class, they will feel more open to honestly communicate some of the feelings, some of their opinions within the more formal discussions. I found that what didn't work was if I just created a space for students to say, okay, here's an informal place where you can chat to each other. I actively had to, because that it was just wasn't being used then. Students would just maybe one or two people would come in, but it's the same like if I just created a room in a typical room in the real world and say here's a place where you can talk to each other. It's not necessarily going to mean that people are going to interact. So what I had to do was to what I found then worked was for me to actually set the topic of what we would discuss in formal chats. And that then would give some people something to focus on. And after a while, students then started interacting with each other. They started talking about certain coping strategies they used. And that for me was very important, especially for some students in the class who were really taking strain in balancing products of the course as well as process related issues. And for me, that is summed up perfectly in one of the comments from the students, and I'll read to you what she said. She said, "Hi ladies, I would like to thank those of you that responded to my postings. I must admit that I was really down and felt that no matter what we try to do, there's just no winning. After reading your responses, I realized that there are people out there that do understand. Thank you for the suggestions and the words of encouragement, and yes, I do have a team that I can turn to in my times of need, my master's class. Thank you guys, I really appreciate it." And that for me just sums up what this meant for the students. So it's not enough for me as a lecturer just to come in there and put my information out there. I have to create that environment for students to interact with each other. And people will say, but that's not the duty of an online lecturer. If you want to create the online learning community, you have to incorporate that into the design of your course. I've seen the benefits of it, and it's actually just great to see how motivated students get to learn. It directly impacts on the quality of your discussions you have in your more formal classroom as well.
Thank you for sharing this story with us, Alecia. I hope that this story would also motivate the listeners to incorporate some of these techniques in their own courses. Good luck.